Welcome everyone, and thanks for making time to join us. Whether you're joining us and it's afternoon at your end or morning, thanks again. Some practical issues before we start. So we will be recording this session and you will all receive an email with a link to the recording, or you can check the recording. We will have it available on the SimaPro Help Center in a couple of days. So feel free to view it. And also all attendees are at the moment muted. So we can't hear you, but if you want to provide any comments or questions, then feel free to use the chat box or the question box. If we don't get a chance to answer your questions during the session, then we will make sure to get back to you afterwards by email. So thanks again for joining. I'm Ruba. I'm the Senior Customer Services Specialist at Prey, and I'll be facilitating this session. We're pleased to organize another webinar from our data series. As you know, SimaPro includes a number of data libraries by default, but there are also a number of specific databases, sector-specific or region-specific, such as the Social Hotspots Database, that are also available in SimaPro format. And these you can acquire separately. So for this afternoon, we're taking this opportunity to highlight the Social Hotspots Database developed by NewEarth B. I'm happy to introduce to you Catherine Benoit-Norris and Monique Benema, who will be the main speakers actually for this session. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Just a little background about Catherine and Monique. Catherine is considered a global leader in the field of social lifecycle assessment. She has extensive practical knowledge of social index and footprint tools, underlying methods and data. She also was the lead editor of the UN guidelines for Social LCA and co-created the Social Hotspots Database. A while since she's been busy in the field since 2007, has been consulting large corporations on business and human rights and social sustainability. Monique is the Social Hotspots Database Program Manager for NewEarth B, and her strength is, she's a hands-on professional with international experience, both in the public and private sector. And yeah, it's quite exciting news. She's graduating soon from the master's program on sustainability at Harvard University. So congratulations, Monique, where she had a focus on corporate social responsibility.
Thank you very much, Ruba.
Before I switch things over to Catherine, I'd like to also briefly introduce Prey, where our main mission is to guide positive change with fact-based solutions. So one way we do that is by developing SimaPro, for example, but Prey also plays an active role in a variety of projects and initiatives such as PEF and Social Roundtable. So thanks again for being part of our large SimaPro family, which reaches more than 3,000 users, not only via Prey, but our network of partners worldwide. And finally, a little bit about what you can expect in the next hour. I think Catherine and Monique will go through a more detailed agenda, but just a brief overview. We'll start off by an introduction to Social LCA, what it is, why use it, an overview of the UN guidelines, an introduction to the Social Hotspots database in terms of structure and content, and also especially highlighting the new data in version 4. We'll also go through some practical examples and applications in SimaPro, and of course go over the different versions that are available and the pricing. So that's it from me for now. I'll pass it on to you, Catherine.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Ruba, for the introduction. You should be seeing my slides now.
Yes.
Great. Well, it's an honor and very exciting for us to be presenting today about the new version of the Social Hotspot Database, version 4. We'll just give a very brief overview of Social LCA and then go much more into detail about the Social Hotspot Database and what this new version provides. and also present some examples of application of the Social Hotspot Database and what examples of what you can do with results and how to go further. So before we go into the content, I'd like to ask you to send in the Q&A, in the questions, responses to those questions. So what are you interested in Social LCA for? And what would you like to gain from using a Social LCA database? And we can, probably use those responses as, discussion starters or prompts for our responses when we'll take a pause after presenting on Social LCA and a little bit more on Social Hotspot Database. So thank you for sending response to these questions. So NewEarth B was founded in 2016. It's a B Corp. It is a spin-off of a nonprofit called NewEarth. The Social Hotspot Database was originally a project of NewEarth. We started developing the Social Hotspot Database already in 2009. We made the public version available in 2013, and now we are releasing our 4th version. NewEarth B provides the Social Hotspot Database, but also provide the social risk mapping tool, and we provide consulting and training services on Social LCA, but also on human rights due diligence and on social auditing or ethical compliance. We also produce the hand printer platform for measuring the positive impacts that we can have making changes, positive changes to our environmental impacts. So in a nutshell, Social LCA is a method to analyze the potential social impacts related to product and organization life cycles from cradle to grave. The foundation for Social LCA are the human rights instrument, in particular the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Social LCA is also related to all the other tools available, such as ISO 26000 or the human rights guiding principles. The human rights guiding principle have really positioned human rights due diligence as the most important process a company can apply to demonstrate its commitment and respect toward human rights. And I believe that Social LCA is a tool of excellence to implement human rights due diligence in organization and supply chain. And the SDGs also position human rights and human rights due diligence as the best way to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. The Social LCA is well positioned to apply to human rights due diligence because of its life cycle perspective. So it really can capture well all an organization business relationships because it's holistic and it's a systematic process. Social LCA capture the social impacts that are related to stakeholders' relations that are related to that product or organization life cycle. The goals of Social LCA are to support decision-making by helping to understand better the human rights and social impacts of supply chain and life cycle. It can help to evaluate alternatives, to communicate about social impacts, and to educate on supply chain social responsibility. It's a complementary method to life cycle costing and environmental LCA, part of the life cycle sustainability assessment. It includes socioeconomic impacts. It addresses positive and negative impact. It's an iterative process, just like environmental LCA. So you can go from generic data to more and more specific ones. And life cycle attribute assessment is a core component of the methodology, and we'll present a little bit more of what it means. So I like to present Social LCA as being the addition of methods, models, and data. So methods are contained in documents like the guidelines for Social LCA. But since 2009, many other documents have been published that complements it. In particular, I'm thinking about the Handbook of Product Social Impact Assessment that was published by the Pre-Social Roundtable, that also recommend using databases to conduct social hotspots assessment at the onset of a study. Models are necessary in life cycle assessment because we need a representation of the product life cycle, of its supply chain, and of course, data are necessary to analyze impacts. The guidelines are currently under revision to integrate all the new developments since 2009. It's an ongoing process, and I would like to invite you all to contribute to the public consultation that will take place in the fall of 2019. The revised guidelines will be available for download through the Lifecycle Initiative website and also through the Social LCA Alliance website. And anyone will be invited to post comments. I also would like to invite you, as one of the co-chair of the guidelines revision process, to take part of the road testing. The call for expression of interest is out now, and you can get a copy from the Lifecycle Initiative website or Social LCA Alliance website as well. So I will just pause for 1 minute and see if Ruba has any questions, or if you would like to type any question about Social LCA at this point.
So we did receive indeed a number of reactions, so thank you all for that. There's also quite a range, so some attendees are interested in just learning the basics as they are new to some of the concepts. Some would like to learn the concepts to be able to help their customers to work more sustainably in the social dimension. And more specifically, for example, some attendees would like to use Social LCA or the Social Hotspots Database to see if they can use it to investigate, for example, social risks in connection with trade activities of a certain country. So yeah, it's quite a nice mix of attendees with different interests.
Thank you, Ruba. Thank you,
Hello?
Ruba. And yes,
yeah, okay.
Absolutely. You can use the Social Hotspot Database to identify social risk. You can also use it to get to impact once you have been able to collect site-specific information. And we'll also get into that a little bit later.
There was just a quick question. Could you repeat the main guidance for the method of Social LCA?
The guidelines for social life cycle assessment of products, copies are available on the UN Environment Lifecycle Initiative website. And I also mentioned the handbook for product social impact assessment that has been published by the Pre-Social Roundtable. And if you have any questions after this webinar, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll be glad to provide you more references.
Yes, I'll be sure to share yours and Monique's contact details in the follow-up email to all attendees.
Thanks, Ruba. So we will now dive in the Social Hotspot Database. So when you start to conduct a social life cycle assessment, the first thing to do, of course, is to set the goal for your study. And as part of that, you need to identify the object of your study. So it can be an organization, it can be a product, it can be anything in between an organization and a product, like an organization division or a portfolio of products. Once you have set up the object of your study and your goal, you will need to get purchases or inputs information. And since the Social Hotspot Database is using an economic global trade model, you will need those information to be in dollars. And you will also need the country of origin for each of these purchases or inputs. You can, if you have the specific country of origin, it's great. If you only have the dollar information of the purchases or the headquarter where those suppliers are being located, you can also use the global trade model to provide you with estimate of what those country of origin are probably located to. So once you have those information, you enter them into SimaPro, and what you will get is the supply chain estimate from the global trade model with all the sector and countries that are involved in that product or organization supply chain. So you will get that supply chain information and modeling. You also get worker hours, which will provide you with estimate of labor intensity for each of the production activities that are part of your product system. And you will get information about the social risk that are related with each of these production activities that are part of your supply chain. We cover 6 impact categories in the Social Hotspot Database, 26 subcategories, 160 indicators, and 244 countries in the risk mapping tool. In the licenses in SimaPro, because of the use of the global trade model, the risk information is available for 140 regions and countries, because that's what's available in the global trade model. We also provide the worker hour model that we have developed from the information available in GTAP in the global trade model, and information that we have collected on average wage by country and sector. So we divide the payment of wages by average wage by country and sector, and provides us with the worker hour estimate. Our data comes from nearly 300 sources of information, including global intergovernmental databases, country statistical agencies, trade unions, NGOs, and so forth. All of our sources are described in our supporting documentation, so you can always go back to the origin or the source that we've used. Also, each one of those subcategories are defined, and the characterization models, or the way that we assign the risk level, is also completely available for each of the subcategories and each of the indicators. So you always know how those risk levels have been assigned. We use several criteria for using data in the Social Hotspot Database. So because we provide information for so many countries and sector, we look at the comprehensiveness of information available, the legitimacy of the data source, the reliability of the method used to collect information by that source. We like to have a mix of quantitative and qualitative indicators. We look at the meaningfulness of the data available, the timeliness. We like to use different sources when relevant to increase the robustness of the results. And we only use publicly available information, so you can always go back to the source. We use the GTAP model for the global trade model that we use. So GTAP provided a global economic equilibrium model from which was derived a global trade model. It is the model with the highest number of countries and a consistent 57 sectors matrix. So you always have consistent results, always for the same number of sectors for any country or production activity in your supply chain. Those are the 57 sectors that are available in the database. There's a greater granularity for the agricultural sectors in general, also the mining sectors and the apparel sectors. In the new version, there are more countries available. So from 113 countries and region, we now have 140 countries and region. Version 9 of the GTAP model, which is the latest one available, is based on year 2011. GTAP will be releasing a version 10 model sometime, I believe, this summer. So we will be passing to that version 10 also in the coming few months. For our new data available, we now have discrimination as a new subcategory, and then this new impact category and two new impact subcategories. Also, all of the information or the vast majority of the indicators have been updated for this version, and we will now release new version of the database every 6 months with part of the indicators always being revised. So this new 6 impact categories provide 14 quantitative indicators. So those are not risk indicators. They're not part of the impact assessment method, but they are much valuable for research and also studies looking at, for instance, how payments are distributed in supply chains. And I believe that those will be greatly used in the coming few years. The Social Hotspot Database provides an impact assessment method or several in this new version. It uses lifecycle attribute assessment. It also weights the risk level, very high being a weight of 10, high of 5, medium 1, low 0.1. So it multiplies the hours work in function of the dollars spent and the risk level for each of the social impact indicator. And that's how medium risk hours equivalent are being calculated. Those risk factors have been developed by conducting a meta-analysis of the Social Hotspot Database and are representing the probability of this risk to be happening. The new impact assessment methods, there are 3 now. One is weighting the impact categories equally. So we don't have the same number of subcategories for each impact category. So when we weight the impact categories equally, that means that the subcategories become not weighted equally, and vice versa. So we now have an impact assessment method with the impact categories weighted equally, and then another one where the subcategories are all weighted equally, and a third one that combines both approaches. And we tend to use the combined impact assessment method in our studies. In SimaPro, you can always create your own impact assessment method, and we believe that this is really one of the development options for the future. Looking at what impact assessment methods are best responding to different customer needs. We are also testing a normalization method at the moment, and this method should become available in the next release of the database. So I will pause again and see if there's any burning question on the Social Hotspot database.
Well, there is one interesting question, Catherine. You said that social impacts can be positive and negative. How does labor intensity behave here? Does it contribute positively or negatively? Under which conditions?
Labor intensity is quite neutral. It can be positive or negative, depending on the work conditions that are associated with that labor intensity. The labor intensity is used in the database as an indication of the strength of the relationship between the production activities to the product system. So if there's more in labor intensity for one production activity, there's a stronger link assigned or a stronger weight assigned to that production activities in the context of the product system. So depending of the level of risk, so for instance, if there's a low risk of social benefits, that is a strength. If there's a very high risk of forced labor, for instance, it's a weakness.
It's a weakness. Yes. Thank you.
Or negative, or strong negative impact.
Yeah. So I think you're just coming to this because there was also just a question about the functional unit. So I see that already popping up on your slide. So maybe a bit more. How do you, not how do you determine what do you use as a functional unit, and how do you interpret the results in Social LCA? I know it's a bit more of a broader question, but maybe now with your example, you can give a bit more information on that.
That's a perfect bridge. And Monique, you would like to?
You can hear me all now?
Yes.
Okay, so no, I think that's a perfect bridge. So I'm delighted to tell a little bit more about some practical examples. So what can you do with the Social Hotspot database? And the first example we would like to discuss is a chocolate cookie production factory. And here, so the functional unit depends also on the scope of your analysis. And so in this case, the functional unit was 2 million kilograms of chocolate cookies, because that was what this production facility was producing. So I
already like your example, Monique.
Yeah. Sorry. So when you produce 2 million kilograms of cookies, you have to determine how much it is worth expressed in US dollars 2011. And that's because the GTAP version is based on that. And if you look into that, then you see that you need the sugar, wheat, cocoa, butter, salt, vanilla, shea butter, milk, and potato starch. You have to determine where it's coming from. And then you have to determine what the value is expressed in US dollars 2011. And that's very important, you have to map it to one of the 57 GTAP categories. So if you have, and after you've done that, then you can open up your SimaPro, and then you could put that into your so-called product system. So you can see here now the screen of the SimaPro, and then you recognize the sugar, the wheat, the dairy, the milk. So all the products are mapped here. In total, it's more than 11 million US dollar worth. So this is related to this to the functional unit. So the millions of chocolate cookies. And if you have done that, so this is the product system, then the next slide, you have to determine which assessment method you're going to use. Catherine and I, we normally we often use the method where you can use both. So you can use the method where the 5 main categories are weighted equally. And sometimes it's a lot better to look at use the method where the different subcategories are weighted equally. But we'll show you that later how that works out. So you have to choose that, and then I give the word to Catherine to explain a little bit more about this.
So the type of results that you can obtain from using the Social Hotspot database in SimaPro are social footprint results, which are the overall social risk, the medium risk hour equivalent that are associated with your product system by overall, or by impact category, or by impact subcategory. Impact categories are referred to as damage categories in SimaPro, and subcategories can be found under characterization in SimaPro. You can also get process contribution results, which we call social hotspots, and you can get those for a single score, so overall social risk. And you can also get those by impact category or by impact subcategory by choosing damage or characterization in the little option box. You can also look at social hotspots for your entire product system, but also you can select each one of the ingredients under material. You can also look at your product system as a network, and you can also compare between different product system, compare results. And maybe just a note before, so all of the inputs that you enter in SimaPro for the Social Hotspot database, because it's a global trade model, they're all under inputs from the technosphere. And when you look or study a sector, you will see all those purchases based on the global trade model. And if you scroll down, you will get to the social indicator information in SimaPro that will provide you with the risk information for that sector or country that you are studying. So if we look at results.
Yeah, so if you then show you so you can have a lot of different types of results. And so one of them, but it's just an example, is that you look at the social footprints of all these chocolate cookies, and then you look at them and you take into account the 5 main categories of social impact. And if you then look at those, here you can see that the labor rights and decent work, that's the one on the left, is relatively big, and then there's a very small one, that's the one related to health and safety. And then the human rights is a little bit bigger, and governance. And the biggest one here for this case study is the social impacts related to community. So that's the first conclusion you can draw here. But what is maybe even more important is that you can see that especially the ingredient shea butter has a huge contribution to those social impacts, and then followed by vanilla, and then actually the cocoa contribution is relatively small, where actually when we started the case study, a lot of people were expecting that cocoa would be the biggest contributor. But so if you look into it and using our models, then you can see this result, and shea butter is a huge contributor to the overall impacts. But if you go ahead, Catherine.
So those are supply chain results. So it's the shea butter supply chain, the vanilla and the cocoa supply chain, and not just those specific production activities. It's their entire supply chain that we're seeing here.
Yeah. So when we talk about footprints, it's always the complete supply chain deep down. So all the suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, etc., are included here. And we did this analysis actually 2 years ago based on our older version of the Social Hotspot Database. And then what you can see is there was a different outcome then. And so it was mainly the labor rights and decent work which contributed to the social risks. And it was mainly vanilla actually which contributed to the social risk. So that's interesting to see that over time social risks can really change.
Sorry, before you move on, quick question, is the medium hour equivalent already reflects the whole supply chain or just a specific sector or country?
The medium risk hours are that's how we quantify so in this example, so on the y-axis you see medium risk hours. So and the idea is that so for instance for labor rights and decent work, the social impacts related to that main category, this includes all the social impacts in all the supply chains deeper down the supply chain. So it's not only tier 1, it's tier 2, it's tier 3, it's everything what is happening to make the shea butter, for instance. And then you can see this block, and that represents the social footprint of the shea butter as used in this chocolate cookie factory. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
So you can also look at it from a more detailed perspective. So then you look into the impacts per subcategory. So that's I always compare it with an onion. So first you look at it on the 5 main categories, and then you go 1 layer down, and then you can look at the social impacts per subcategory. And then here also you can see that the contribution by the different ingredients can be very different. So what here you can see that, for instance, so the unemployment is the one a little bit in the middle. So you get a lot of different ingredients contributing to that specific social impact category. Whereas for a lot of others, you only see 3 ingredients contributing to that social impact subcategory.
Another question regarding the data, Monique, is there any factoring of uncertainty?
That's a question I refer to Catherine.
Okay.
No, we don't measure uncertainty in the Social Hotspot Database. We don't provide quantified indicators on uncertainties.
Okay, thank you.
But those uncertainties can be estimated, qualitatively using a pedigree matrix approach.
Yes, that's also available in SimaPro indeed. Yeah, thank you.
But you can also look at the social footprints per ingredient. So here you see the main ingredients listed, and then also it becomes very clear that the shea butter coming from Nigeria is the biggest contributor. You can also see how the 5 main categories then contribute to the overall social impact risks. And so shea butter is the biggest, followed by vanilla, but the difference is not that big. And then you have cocoa, and the rest is relatively nothing. So so if you make chocolate cookies, then those are the 3 ingredients which in potential could create some social impacts deeper down in your supply chain. And so if you so we just till now we have looked at the social footprints. That's the complete sum of the social impacts of the whole supply chain. If you now look at the hotspots, and that's like where exactly are the activities which are contributing the most. So that's what we call hotspots. If you look into that, then again you can see that. Oh no, not again. So then you can see that the different ingredients, so which we discussed so far, are the biggest contributor to that.
So those are not social footprint results, but social hotspot results. So we can see that, in fact, from the shea butter supply chain, it's really the shea butter harvesting that is causing most of the impact, and the same for vanilla and cocoa.
So what we did in this case, for instance, so you know where your potential risks are. And so, for instance, related to the potential risks related to vanilla, we did some investigation, we did some research, and then we saw that very recently the Malagasy government, so where the vanilla is from, was quite active on introducing living wage and introducing code of conduct for child labor, and there are big programs funded by the US to improve the sustainability of the harvesting of vanilla. And so taking into account all these kind of initiatives, then you can adjust the risk levels in SimaPro, and so then you can run the analysis again, and then you can see what impact some of those initiatives can have. And so so overall the conclusions were that cocoa was not the biggest contributor, shea butter and vanilla from Madagascar, where you could also see, we didn't show everything here, what you can see in SimaPro, but from that you could see that especially child labor and the low wages and access to drinking water and sanitations, those were the biggest subcategory social impacts. And so the idea is that with this type of information you can go into your next you can follow up by saying, let's as a company join initiatives focusing on the vanilla in Madagascar on child labor, or you might consider joining access to drinking water and sanitation programs, and that's then as a way to decrease your social impacts related to the production of chocolate cookies. So this is just an example of what you can do with the Social Hotspot Database, and I think this is a good sheet, Catherine. The word is for you.
Okay, so like Monique explained, you can adjust the risk level for each indicator. So for instance, if the chocolate cookie manufacturing company is deciding to source shea butter from a fair trade certified source, then you can look at what the fair trade certification manages as social issues, and you can adjust the risk level for these indicators that are now being managed from very high to low, or high to low, depending. You can also adjust purchases. So in this case, we already add the information about the ingredients and where they were coming from, and also the dollar value of those purchases. Sometimes you start with estimates, so you can adjust those with more specific information as it becomes available. And then you can also adjust the social hotspot index methodology. So that's the impact assessment method. For instance, we have a lot of users that want to zero out the low risk, for instance, because they're really just interested into the main hotspots and not so much about those activities that are at lower risk.
Can I ask, before you move on to the second example, there was quite an interesting question regarding child labor. So of course, in principle, we don't want children working, but in other countries, if you take away, in certain countries, if you take away their job, their income, then the alternative is that they would go, for example, to drugs or sexual exploitation, unfortunately, which would definitely be much worse than working in a field or factory. Is there a way to assess the consequences of decisions like taking away child labor in order to have a better results in the product? So you're, so yeah, if you're understanding the nuances here, you are assessing something, but it could be have an adverse consequence. So can that be reflected somehow?
Well, I will refer to the guiding principles and the human rights due diligence. What is expected from companies is to understand the social risk in their supply chain, in their business relationships. Now, best practices regarding child labor requires remediation. So it's not enough to just change where you're sourcing from, or just to send children back home. What is required from companies is that they have a remediation plan. So if there's child labor happening in their supply chain, they need to provide new opportunities for these children, and opportunities for schooling, opportunities for development. So they're not just usually sent back home. So when you know that there is a great child labor risk in your supply chain, that's a great opportunity to reach out to your suppliers, also to the local community. Depending of where you are, there might be NGOs or nonprofit organization working on the ground, so you can learn more and have a plan of action. Okay, because reputational risk for companies actually represent about 25% of their market value, and studies have shown that they are vulnerable to when these type of situations are being exposed to the public. Okay. The share of these companies do go down.
Of course, yeah. We have a lot of questions. I'm sorry, everybody, we're not getting a chance to cover everything. I'm just a bit mindful of the time. I think we have one more very interesting example that Catherine Monique will show, and then hopefully we can tackle a few of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, this example is a different one. This is an example of people or a company who were looking into 3 different options to buy garments, and the idea is that they would like to make an analysis of what the impacts could be if you buy garments from China or from Vietnam or from Indonesia. And so if you look into that, then you can, the next slide, please. Then you can see the footprints again. So the footprint, if you source garments from China, then that's the left bar. Then you can see that's a combination of different types of social impacts. So you can see all the different colors represent different types of social impacts. Then if you compare that to Vietnam, you have a relatively similar type of pattern, not only the overall magnitude, but also the composition of the total social impacts are very similar. If you then compare that to the social impacts related to buying garment in Indonesia, you can see there are some differences, and the idea is not that you should go to the place where the impacts are the lowest, but that you really look into which impacts are there and which are the ones you think as a company are important, or you as a company think that you can contribute to, and so that you can make your case. So for instance, in this case, the occupational toxics and hazards, so the social impacts related to working in an environment where there are some dangerous things around, that contributes big. So actually, what you can see here is that in China and Vietnam, it's a lot bigger than in Indonesia, and so on. What you also can do is look at the hotspots. So that's more like that you go into the supply chain related to producing garments. And if you then look at the overall hotspots, you can see a very interesting thing. So like in China, the biggest hotspot is related to producing the textile and not so much producing the garments. Where, for instance, if you look into Indonesia, you can see that the biggest hotspots are related to producing the garments and less to producing the textiles. So that's the kind of information you can get now. So in Vietnam, it's very clear that besides the hotspots in Vietnam related to producing textile and producing the garments itself, there's also a big hotspot related to textiles coming from China. And that's because Vietnam imports a lot of textile from China. So in that sense, the social hotspot in Vietnam is partly based in China, because deeper down the supply chain, China activities are involved. So that's if you look at the hotspot with at the overall perspective. If you then zoom in, for instance, and look only at the hotspots related to the wages, so the social issues related to wages, it's very clear that the hotspots are related to making textile, and so not so much related to the producing of the garments, but the production of the textile, which normally it's your tier 2 producer, so you have less influence on them than if you work with the one who makes your garment, and they work probably with their suppliers, and they are providing the textile. So that's something you can take into account as a company. Okay, so if you think wages are very important, and to make sure that then you have to make a program focused on those who produce textile, and because there's where the social hotspot can be. And then if you take another lens and you look at the 3 options and take into account the child labor hotspots, then you can see that the picture is different again. And still the producer of textile and garments are big, but here you can clearly see that also deeper down in the supply chain. So the ones where the growing of the cotton, so that's the plant-based fiber activities. So like if you look into the Indonesia example, for instance, you can see that the cotton coming from Benin, for instance, could be a social hotspot if you buy garment from Indonesia, and that's something you don't know up front. And so by doing these kind of analysis, you have a better understanding what's going on beyond your garment producer supplier. So, and then you can use this information to focus your information to gather more information. And so this is, I think, the conclusion. So social impacts can be very different for the different production countries, And then the hotspots can be very different depending on the social impact category you're looking at. And these kind of information, you can use this, for instance, to formulate the questions you have for your supplier. So if you know that deeper down there might be a problem, then you can activate your supplier to make sure that he takes care of this issue. And so that's the idea behind doing these kind of analysis. We have 5 minutes for questions. Oh, no, sorry. We have something else to share. Sorry.
Yes, I don't know. So you also wanted to share a little bit maybe about the licensing and the pricing.
Yeah.
So, one great way to also look at the risk information is by using the risk mapping tool. That's a great complement to the licenses in SimaPro because you can compare the risk information between countries and also use different visualization tools. And the new version of the risk mapping tool has been launched just recently. For the licenses in SimaPro, the first year of service contract is included. It also comes with 1 hour training, which I really advise users to take so that they learn how to use the full scope of the Social Hotspot Database in SimaPro. There's different pricing depending of, if you're in a private or public sector, or if it's to be used in an academic environment. On request, we also provide pricing or discounted pricing for universities that are located in non-OECD countries.
There was a question, Catherine. There's one of the attendees has already purchased version 3. How does it work? Do they automatically get version 4, for example, if they have a service contract, or how do you?
Yes, with a service contract. If with a service contract, so either if the users have purchased their license within the past year, they're already covered by the service contract and can obtain the new version for free. If you have the service contract that is still valid, you can also get the update for free, or you can opt in by purchasing the service contract.
Okay. And there was another question that one of the attendees has seen that you offer an add-on of the Social Hotspots Database to Ecovent, for example. I don't know, can you give a little bit more information on how that works in SimaPro?
Yes, that's right. We have a combined version of the Social Hotspot Database with EcoInvent. That version, so it was possible because now EcoInvent has Exiobase in the background. However, it only has a very limited country-specific processes information. So you can't really assess hotspots with that version of the Social Hotspot Database. You can only calculate social footprint. So yeah, it's interesting in a way, but as soon as you want to take the next step, then
dig deeper. Yeah, then it's more comprehensive. And there was another question regarding your data sources, or how do you obtain data? So in the example you shared, the first example for how do you get data, for example, on child labor in chocolate making in Madagascar?
So the information on child labor, we have quantitative and qualitative information. The quantitative information that we have is from the Understanding Children Work Project, which is a collaboration between ILO and UNICEF. And it actually provides percentages of children working in country and sector. It uses the ILO sector classification, so we've mapped those sectors to ours. We also use qualitative information provided by several sources on the risk of children working in different countries and sectors. We don't have So, you know, the sector classification that we have doesn't, you know, go. So actually part of the same sector classification, which is NEC.
I think, and all what Catherine just said is included in our documentation. So if you want to know exactly where the information is coming from, then you can just look into the documentation and then you can find the sources yourself and you can see how we determined the social level risks and et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we're very transparent.
Great. Maybe just one more question before we wrap up. Within SimaPro, is it possible to create comparative scenarios, for example, between public, private, and informal economies? I don't know if that's...
Yes, you can absolutely do comparative scenarios. Informal economy is a tricky subject because although we do have risk level for some of these you know, informal activities, they are not captured in the global trade model because by definition the global trade model only capture what is in the formal economy.
Thank you so much for your explanations. Attendees, thank you so much for your questions and for the interaction. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to cover all questions, but Monique and Catherine will receive a copy of the questions and they will get back to you separately. Yeah, keep tuned for further data series and other applications using SimaPro. Monique and Catherine, thank you so much for making the time to explain all of this to us. And yeah, till next time.
Thank you very much. Don't hesitate to contact us.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.